Welcome, everyone. My name is Heather Pribben. I am a customer account manager with Clio. I've only been with Clio for just under a year, but I'm particularly well suited to today's conversation because in my previous roles, I've helped a number of businesses implement automation and CRM software to find greater efficiencies in their business and leverage the conversion of more prospects. A little backstory for you. I am the daughter of a woman who describes herself as the laziest organized person you will ever meet. With pride, I tell you, she is very, very proud of that fact. She would gladly spend an hour creating an organizational system for her Tupperware if it meant that she didn't have to spend 5 minutes every time she was making our lunch to find the right lid or the right container. So from a very early age, I learned that investing the time up front to create an organizational system meant that I had more time to do the things that I love and had less stress, which, let's be real, we can all use. So my question to you is, my question to you is, if I could fly my mother to your office, what would you have her organize? All right, that joke did not land. I'm all right with that. I'm gonna move on, guys. Obviously, I was kidding. My mother does not fly anymore. The real question is, what part of your intake workflow is consistently causing friction for you and your clients? And what would it mean for your business if you could implement automation or systemizations that would improve that workflow? How would it benefit both in increased conversion and in the reduction of administrative time if you could provide better flow for that workflow? So hopefully you've joined us for other sessions with my colleagues and learned all different ways of bringing leads into your business, whether it's through emails, PR. I think there's been blog talks at this point. We've given you all of these different methods to bring in new opportunities for your business. Now we're here to talk about what to do with those, how to make the most of those leads that you've worked so hard to bring to life. So today, to do that today, I have two of your colleagues here that are ready to share their experience and their wisdom regarding intake workflows. Herb Wilson, gentleman on the end here, will be helping us get to the heart of customer intake and will be sharing his own case study as well as the practical lessons it taught him for understanding his prospects. Herb will leave us asking all the right questions to create an intake process designed to get to the heart of your client's needs and to meet them where they are. He'll be joined by Erin Callahan, who will be sharing her experience creating intentional workflows and blueprinting charts to create efficiencies from intake right through the entire client experience. She'll leave us with practical tips and resources. There's a handout that's going to be brought to you guys shortly for blueprinting your business intake and beyond. We'll wrap the session with a recap of key takeaways, as well as leaving time for questions for myself, Herb, or Erin. Now, that's enough from me. Let's hear about these lovely people up on stage. Herb, tell the people about yourself.
Thank you, Heather. My name's Herb Wilson. I work at the Northcutt Legal Clinic. We are a program of the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence, which is our local domestic violence shelter, and we provide pro bono civil legal services to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And since starting, one of my big points of emphasis has been to try to streamline our intake process so that we can reach our clients more quickly and with less hassle for them. We want to streamline it and make it easier to get in to reduce the chance that they'll end up going back to their abuser. And because the more steps they have to take, the longer it takes to get them in, the more likely it is that that's going to happen. I live in Gulfport as well as working there. I live with my wife, Kim, and our two dogs, Jadzia and Titan, and our two cats, Kira and Posey.
I can already feel the tension on stage. It's been revealed that the two of them have dogs and I do not, and they immediately created a schism right down the middle of the stage where I was ousted 100% from our previous friendship.
Well, yeah. Heather, you like Star Trek, and our dogs are named after Star Trek characters.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah,
I do love Star Trek, and I am very glad to say that Herb and I did bond over that. But I'm also extremely curious about your love of karaoke, which you've shared with us previously. I believe I have a video somewhere if anybody wants to check in with me later. So I need to talk to the event staff, but I'm pretty sure we're going to arrange to have a karaoke machine at the after hours tonight. And so I'm curious, what song will you be performing for us, Herb?
Well, my go-to crowd pleaser is Be Prepared from The Lion King.
Oh, I know. I saw the video.
But fair. But since we're in Nashville, I almost have to go with something country like Orville Peck or Johnny Cash.
All right. That sounds good. Now, Erin, what will you be performing for the talent portion of today's event?
Well, I'm not sure I can compete with you and Herb, so I'm going to bow out politely of this one, but I'll come better prepared next year.
All right. Well, fair enough. I was hoping for some, flaming batons or something. But in the meanwhile, tell the people about yourself.
My name is Erin. I own my own firm, the Law Office of Erin C. Callahan. I've had my practice since 2018, and I mainly do estate planning and probate. And interestingly enough, how I opened my own practice is I did all the research, found out that I wanted to move to Clio, took it to my previous employer, and said, hey, this is what I think we should do. I'd love to have a discussion with you about it. He said no, and I turned in my 2 weeks notice and opened my own firm because I couldn't possibly work any more hours. So had to give somewhere. But my practice, and I live as well in Houston, in South Houston off of NASA Parkway, so right across the street from NASA. And so that's fun. And speaking of fun, in my spare time, I love to spend time with my family. We like doing anything and everything outdoors, especially on the lake. And we also have 2 dogs, Waffles and Kaya. I did not name them. Our children did, obviously. And that being said, I'm excited to be here today.
Despite the schism that I mentioned earlier, which is still a little stinging, I'm not going to lie. Just because I don't have a dog doesn't mean that I'm not a nice person. I like dogs. I just don't have a dog. That said, Erin and I have bonded over our love of life hacks and spreadsheets. So we still have a connection. I'm so grateful to have you both here. It's been such a pleasure working with you both. They'll be sharing their journey and perspective on making effective client intake workflows. And it's been really interesting, given that they both come from opposite sides of the legal profession, that being not-for-profit and for-profit, or grant-funded and for-profit. It's really been encouraging to see that the workflows and the philosophies are very similar, which makes me feel like no matter where you come from, no matter what practice type you are engaged in, there will be value for you in this presentation. And so let's get right to it. Herb, talk to the people. Tell them what you've got. Tell them your story. It's a good story.
Oh, thank you for that kind introduction, Heather. And it's ironic, Erin and I were paired together originally because it was expected we would have very different perspectives, and we've been lockstep on a lot of this, which I think really is a testament to how universal these processes can be. And so I'm really excited to be here with everyone today, and I'm ready to just dive on in and start talking about empathy and how you can use it to break down barriers in your intake process that could be keeping clients from connecting with you. So for our purposes today, when we're talking about empathy, we're thinking about putting ourselves in our client's shoes so that we can understand not only the systemic challenges they may be facing, but what they're feeling and how that may be creating barriers that are preventing them from reaching out and seeking your services. And there's 2 important ideas I want us to keep in mind as we talk about all this throughout the session. One is that intake is not just what happens once they call. Intake starts well before that. Intake starts when you are trying to reach out to them in the community and get in touch with them. And the other important thing is that even though for what we're doing today, we're talking about putting ourselves in our client's shoes, that is not the end all be all of empathy. In other words, we don't want to fall into the trap of saying, well, if I were in your shoes, I would have done something different. And I love this quote from Brené Brown from Atlas of the Heart, where she says, rather than walking in your shoes, I need to learn how to listen to your story and listen to the story you tell about what it's like in your shoes and believe you even when it doesn't match my experiences. What I really like about that quote is that it emphasizes how important it is to listen and listen non-judgmentally so that you can understand and forge bond with your client. And when we were designing our intake, there were 2 key questions we kept in mind, which is, who are our clients and where are they coming from? And let me give you an example of how we applied this. So we know because of what we do that our clients are people who have experienced abuse and trauma. And we know from Clio Grow, from their statistics, that most of our referrals come from either court advocates who are members of the shelter that accompany victims to court. They sit in on domestic violence trials and restraining order hearings in municipal and justice courts, or from court staff. And so because of who they are and because of how they're reaching us, we know that at this point they're already involved in the legal system. And because of that, we know that they've probably already been re-traumatized over and over again. Because unfortunately, that is something the legal system does. It forces victims to relive their trauma over and over again in the pursuit of justice. And this is something I have a lot of personal experience with, drawing on both my status as a childhood survivor of homicide as well as an adult survivor of sexual assault. And it was that last experience that really informed a lot of my perspective on client intake. About 6 months before I started this job, I was working at a different firm and I was covering a routine immigration hearing in New Orleans. And I got approached by a woman on the street, propositioned, and when I declined, I was forcefully groped for an extended period of time. I managed to get away and get to safety and get to my hearing on time. And after I got out of court, I called my direct supervisor. And what she told me was, well, you need to call the police. You need to go and make a report. So I did. And they took it seriously. And because they took it seriously, I ended up spending most of the day at the hospital telling my story over and over again, I think 6 times by my count, before going through a SANE exam. So I ended up telling it to the first officer I spoke to at the precinct, twice to the detective from the special victims section, first a Cliff Notes version at the station, then a more detailed version that she recorded. I ended up explaining what happened to the SANE nurse because they needed to know what to check and where to look. And I ended up talking to a social worker about it from the police department and someone from the Family Justice Center in New Orleans. And so that's 6 times before I even go to the exam. And if they had caught the person, I would have had to have told that story even more times to the prosecutor at trial, potentially on appeal, and so on. But going back to that Brené Brown quote, yeah, even though I have some insight into the system from my experiences, I don't think it's fair for me to say that I have walked in my client's shoes because of it. And the reason is that I know from listening to my clients that I did not experience the same justice system that they did. I'm navigating it from a very different perspective. I am a loud, giant, cis white lawyer, and I am going to have a different experience navigating the legal system than most of my clients are. And knowing that I was that re-traumatized in a case where I was treated well and taken seriously, I can only imagine what my clients are feeling when they are not. And so that could create barriers that we may not be aware of. And so going back to what we're saying, we know who our victims are, right? We know where they're coming from. We know they're in this system and they're being re-traumatized and they're getting our number from the court or from the court advocates, but many of them aren't calling right away. They're calling weeks later, if they even call at all. Why? Why aren't they calling? This was something we wanted to sit down and figure out as a staff. So when we were revising our intake process, we just brainstormed some ideas, and this is a partial list of what we came up with. Maybe they got back with their abuser. They had a bad experience with police or the court, which is the common experience. Maybe they're having difficulty verbalizing their abuse, which they'll have to do eventually if they go to court. But for right now, we just want to get them in. Maybe they just have difficulty with phone calls generally. Neurodivergent people in particular can struggle with making phone calls. And there's some people who just hate picking up the phone. Or they could be dealing with the effects of trauma. They have trouble following up on stuff, keeping track of things. And so what we wanted to do was figure out a way to solve these problems. And for this, what we came up with was we need a way other than phone calls for them to reach out, and we need to get to them sooner. And so what we did was we made a public basic intake form, and we turned it into a QR code. And then we sent that QR code to our court advocates for them to keep on hand. And so if they're at court and they're sitting with someone who needs our services, instead of having to give out our number and wait for them to call us back, they can just pop out their phone, show them the code. They can do the intake right then and there, and then they're in. And this is what I meant when I talked about intake starting before they call in. You need to figure out how you're going to get to them in the first place. And what you see on screen, that's actually a live QR code that leads to our intake form. And the next slide will have some screenshots. So if you don't want to pull out your phone, you don't have to. But if you do, you can pull up the whole thing right there. Please do not submit it. And so a few things that I want to point out that you can see from here. This is, aside from the contact information, this is the entire intake form. And you'll notice it's very short and it's very simple because at this point, all we want to do is screen for basic eligibility and conflicts. It's a domestic violence situation and we don't have a conflict. We want to get them in quickly without making them have to wade through a bunch of bullshit. And so we also want to make sure that our clients are feeling comfortable and safe with us. And we try to acknowledge that in the questions we ask and how we ask them. So we ask them if they have a preference other than their legal name, something they want to be called, and what their pronouns are, because we want to signal to anyone who's applying that's transgender that we don't hate them and we will help them. But we also don't want them to feel like we're forcing them out of the closet. So it's just a way that we can get information so we can hopefully avoid misgendering or dead naming them and make sure that they feel safe and supported. Because we know statistically that trans people experience domestic violence at a much, much higher rate than the general population. And we don't want to make that worse. We don't want them to end up going back to their abuser because they don't trust us. And so the only time we actually have the client fill anything out and go into detail about anything is when they have already been approved for services. And now they can just do that client intake form on their phone instead of what we did before, which was filling it out in the office. When I first started, what it looked like was the picture on the left, just piles of paper. They would come in, they'd get handed a folder with all their reading material and all their intake forms, and they would have to sit in our office, fill it out by hand, wait for the attorney to come in, review everything, go over everything with them, and then sit down. And this was just taking hours. And what we wanted was something like what you see on the right. So how did we get from one to the other? Well, that was using the tools we had, Clio Grow and Clio Manage, and then applying that through their perspective, understanding what they're feeling and building our intake around that. So this is an example of some of the things we kept in mind. Again, not an exhaustive list, but we know that they may be feeling re-traumatized. We don't want to contribute to that. We went through and we minimized redundancies. We went through every time to take out any duplicate questions and to make sure that when we're having them verbalize the abuse, that they really only have to do that once, just so we can evaluate their case. We know that they may be feeling uncertainty, so we set it up so that our emails early on map out the process and the rough timeline so that they know what to expect and what all the steps are going to be. And we know that they could be feeling overwhelmed by information. If you get handed a folder full of reading material, that's just overwhelming. That may be too much for them. So we set it up to where they get emailed the reading material in advance of the meeting using the Clio Grow workflows. So we also know that they may be forgetful. We'd have people miss appointments all the time. And it's not because they don't care, they don't want to get away from their abuser. It's just they're dealing with a lot of stuff. They have whole ass lives outside of what they're dealing with. And so we deal with that by using the reminders in Clio Grow. And so there is a little bit of give and take here, right? Because we don't want to overwhelm them with reminders, but these are the sort of things that we thought about when we were building this. And we wanted to build it in such a way that they would feel safe and supported during a terrible time. And what it really took was us making the time to sit down as a staff and talk about all this together. And, we're so busy, it felt like impossible to do it, but it was important that we set aside that time around to consider all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one of the things that Herb said that really rings true on my side of it too is, being an estate planning attorney, we're obviously dealing with death and people don't want to face it. So everything that Herb said also applies to my business as well, because it's the same kind of situation. Often people don't want to pick up the phone, or often they have a spouse that's struggling, or they're neurodivergent, or there's some type of issue that's causing them or preventing them to not prioritize it. So, I totally agree with everything that you said, and it just makes sense. One of my favorite, quotes is, an hour of planning can save you 10 hours of doing. And the reality is it's true. I mean, if you look at it in the scope of estate planning, you can spend an hour or two doing a will, or you can spend 10 to 20 hours doing a probate. And I think that sets it up to give you a visual of really kind of what we're talking about today. It's the same thing. You're going to invest more time on the front end, but you're going to reap the benefit, on the back end. So blueprinting, which really just means, system and planning, for our visual learners, I want to see it. And so that's, why we kind of called it blueprinting. But it's one of my favorite tools. I use it in my personal life, from everything from chores to systemizing everything at the office. Quick story, in law school, I had a business law professor, and he used to always yell at us every single class in this Boston accent, "Who's your client?" And he'd say it over and over again, "Who's your client?" And that's one thing that when Herb and I were talking that we really wanted to get across to you guys is answering that question, who's your client and where are they coming from? Okay, so now to the exciting part. All of you should have a worksheet. There also is a digital copy online. So if you're in the app and you're not a paper person, then you can click on that and you can use it and use it on your devices as well. So this is how I kind of approached our systems and planning and developing that blueprint and workflows in my office. So to give you a first example, I want you to take a look at the top. And the first question is like, how are all these people coming to you? It's great that you have somebody answering your phones, or it's great that somebody's helping you with email, but what about all the other stuff? Are friends and family, potential clients messaging you on socials? Are you losing track of that? How's that getting input into Clio? Are you waiting a week or 2 weeks to call them back because you just haven't had a second to get to it? It's not in your pipeline. And same can be said for text too. Are people calling you personally or texting you personally, or are they calling the office? So in that first group, you really want to think through like how clients are coming to you, how they're contacting you specifically, and that's going to be different for all of you. And so just kind of build out and think through every step. And then I urge you to go back to it a couple times, because I'm sure there'll be some ways that you'll forget. The other day I had somebody message me on my personal Instagram account, and I don't really do private messages on Instagram. And so we didn't have a system set up for that. And so I had to rethink and make sure that how were we going to get that data into Clio and be able to respond to it appropriately. Because I might be in court, or I might, be out of the office for a week at ClioCon. So the key part after you've thought about how all those clients come to you is thinking about what integrations, what automations are you going to use for that. And so not just do you want to have that first level, you also want to have the key is the second level. So I want you to think about the automation part of it. So, do you have CallRail? Do you have RingCentral? Do you have DialPad? Or who do you have that is answering your phone, who's, bringing those contacts into your Clio system. And so, and think about it for two, like I know a lot of people use like Connect and Lawmatics. And so the same goes for like texting as well. And even on your website, it's not just for calls, you can put a form on your website, and like Herb was talking about, your intake form, you can make it public, and then it just brings it right into the Clio message box, which is really nice. So it's best to keep your kind of goal in mind. I mean, I could tell you what my goal is, but you've got to think through for your business. I know there's some firms out there that have been doing this new thing where like when they call, you try to do like an instant consult with them. That's not my method. I know it's still fairly new out there. I try not to take unscheduled calls. And so I don't want to get into like a long conversation with a client when they call. I also a lot of times want to get their original will that they have and look at that during the consult with them. And so that's why we personally wait. So we like to have all those calls scheduled, all those consults scheduled. My team knows not to ask a lot of questions at that time. And so, you don't want them to pick up the phone and be like, hi, the law office of blah, 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 how can I help you? The client says 2 sentences, and then your person who's answering your phone says, what's your name? What's your last name? How do you spell that? What's your email? What's your phone number? What's your address? You lose that rapport with the client when you're doing that. And we all need that data, like I get it, but you want to teach like your team to like listen, build that rapport, and then kind of respond with a question. Especially if you're having somebody call from like an online lead and this is their first interaction with you, ultimately at the end of the day, what people want is for you to listen to their problem and then to offer a solution. And so that's one key thing that I always recommend is just figure out what your goal is, and then make sure all your systems are pointing towards that goal. So for me, it's booking a consult, it's making that appointment, and then don't forget about automations and integrations for this step too. So maybe it's Smith AI that's answering your phones, or Lex Reception, Back Office Betties, Ruby. There's tons here at the conference that you can talk to and get a feeling. So next, let's talk about client actually scheduling the consultation on their own. So true story, back in 2018, when I built my website, we put a scheduler on my website, and people were able to book their own appointments on the website. Not until 2020, until March of 2020, did I have a single person schedule their appointment online. So, I mean, obviously it's after COVID and, our whole world changed. But I was glad that I had it because then we started getting them all the time. And it was, to be candid, it took less time from our team. That's one less call that they're having to have a conversation about. Somebody can just book an appointment overnight when it's convenient for them. And it helps things move along a little bit quicker. And so you just want to make sure you at least have that option. I know a lot of attorneys tell me, I don't want that. Like they could book their, appointment at any time. So you get to put parameters on it. Mine are very specific. These days, these times, people can't book the same day. So it's not like it's going to be a disaster. You build out the parameters, the things that you like, things that are that important to you. I also put like a gap time in between there so that there's never, 2 meetings that are like back to back where I'm, running around too crazy. Okay. So you also, once again, you want to think about kind of the automations at this level too and how those work together. Okay. So one last time, let's look at the blueprint and the workflow just because we're going to move on to after the consult. So I just wanted to give you a quick shot of what I have, and then you can build it out to look at your own. So let's look at after the consultation. So when I first started with Grow, some of the things that I did then, I've made some adjustments and learned from. After the consult, we allowed 2 different paths. One was an engagement agreement path, and one was a non-engagement agreement path. Just meaning that maybe they needed a little bit more hand-holding or attention, or they wanted something from us. Maybe I told them I was going to make a referral or something. And then, so the way that I do it now is everything drives towards an engagement agreement. And so for me, it's a better system. It's faster. It's consistency. Nobody has to think about it. Like my team doesn't say, do I need to send them this or am I sending them that? It's just automatic. It happens. And so I think that's one of the most important things. And so you can see on there, this is how I do it. You have to figure out like what works for you. People certainly do more than this and people certainly do less than this. But my process is after we send the agreement or after, any meeting, we do an email and a text follow-up after 1 week. And then we do a task that gives a phone call at the second week. And then we do an email and text follow-up one last time. And then if we haven't heard from that person at all during those 3 touches, I personally send a non-representation letter to them automatically. So this all happens in a workflow. So I'm not thinking about it. It just triggers it to send that out. And of course, it's nice. It says, we'd love to work with you in the future, and it's not rude saying, we're not representing you anymore. It's very professional. Okay, so let's talk about the engagement agreement a little bit. I don't know what they call it in your state, retainer agreement or whatever, but all kind of the same thing. So I think that this is probably one of the single-handedly easiest ways to start and also start really making a big difference in savings of time specifically. Recently, we ended up doing some A/B testing with Clio Grow and Lawmatics. And so right now we're using Lawmatics and we developed an internal form that I fill out in the consultation. It's about 5 or 6 questions. And then that creates the engagement agreement automatically behind the scenes and sends out to the client. And I would say that it probably saves us about 2 hours easily a week. Okay, so now to the fun part. So favorite features in Clio Grow. So my number 1 favorite feature is automate engagement agreements, which we just talked about. Using the workflows. This is single-handedly one of the most underused features out there. So many people come to me, friends that have just never even set up a workflow. So just start one. Like don't get too far into it. Just start somewhere or just pick one. Unlimited number of email templates. I love that in Clio Grow. You can send out as many emails as you want. Okay, now this is going to be tough news, but I do have to tell you guys that email's dying. So prepare yourself. It's dying. So unfortunately, what that means is, you know, in our practice and just in the practice of law in general, we're seeing response rates go down even if people respond at all. Now, it's still pretty active with professionals like lawyers, doctors, CPAs, but with everybody else, we've had to start texting. And so that's been a big thing on our end too, that we've made some changes recently, and thankfully Clio offers that option as well. So intake forms on your website, this is huge. We talked about that already. Edit the hired pipeline and use it until you close the case. So this is a little bit tricky to explain, but if you guys Google Clio, just CLIO, and my name, Erin Callahan, you will find a video where I've already done previous with Clio a couple years ago, where I walked through how I build out that pipeline. And I think it's also one of the things that's very underused and utilized, especially if you're a visual learner or your people on your team are. Advanced custom fields. This is also amazing. I've seen some of the, so I don't help other people set up Clio, but I have friends that do. And I've seen them do some really amazing things with like online spreadsheets. I think Streamlined Legal has a video on this, but they're just really impressive. So you're probably underutilizing custom fields as well, I promise. And then you can collect payments in seconds with new QR codes. And so I love that Clio is just always on top of that and helping us find new ways to get paid faster and faster. Because the more we get paid, the more, you know, staff we can have, the more people we can help. So favorite features in Lawmatics, I love the editable intake forms. I really like being able to send the intake form to the client and estate planning. You know, they're going to come back to us in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and they can just edit that form. And so that's probably my number one favorite feature. And then create engagement agreements in seconds. We talked about that a little bit. I love that. And then just the unlimited amount of pipelines. I like being able to use it on like referral partners, in other areas than just clients. End-to-end automation, and then just you can put your marketing on autopilot with both with Lawmatics, and then also advanced reporting based on custom fields. You can really drill down into those custom fields and extract the data from there. So, okay. So Herb, how much time do you think, we saw that big stack of paper you had. How much time do you think you saved on just like the intake process?
The initial attorney consult alone went from 2 to 3 hours down to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So that freed up a lot of time for us to put towards other things like practicing for karaoke.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
But the time savings was not the only benefit. One of the things Jack talked about in his keynote was being anti-fragile, right? And so taking the time to build this out the way we did really made us much more resilient, which ended up benefiting us when we lost 40% of our funding and lost a team member. Taking the time to do this really saved our butts. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is how focusing on systems and automation can help you make your firm anti-fragile, help you future-proof, and carry it through these tough times. And this is, I think when you're building your intake, you also need to not only understand your clients, but understand yourself and your staff and what you struggle with, what your needs and your challenges are, and build it in such a way that you're compensating for that so that you can better help your clients. And another thing that Erin and I ended up being very much on the same page about is I also love workflows and the email templates, and we utilize them very heavily. What you see here is actually a map. This is the steps of our intake process. These are the workflows that we use in our standard intake. And every single one of these has either a form or an email that is set to automatically go out when they're applied. And so someone wants services, well, we go straight to number one, right? We do the conflict check. We make sure they meet the most basic eligibility requirements. And then if so, go to 2. We get to 2, that starts the intake process. It preps the form for the advocate who does their intake and gets everything primed for our director to review. Once he reviews it and he makes a decision, we either go to 3 or 3A. They're either accepted or declined. If they're declined, they just get an automatic email letting them know that we can't take their case. And if they're accepted, they get an email automatically letting them know, hey, we're taking your case. Here's what the next steps are. And then they also get the client information form sent to them automatically. And this is the only time that we have them do any data entry is this step between advocate intake and attorney consultation. So we send the reading material out automatically when they get approved. And then by the time they come in, we've all had time to review their answers and everything. And so we go to 3. It also preps a form that we fill out. Like Aaron, I created a form that we do during our attorney consult that we fill out that lays out the basics we need for document automation and directions for our paralegal and so on. And then finally, we have a finalizing intake, which just automatically populates some steps for us to double check, make sure we have the client, the abuser, safe contact set up properly, make sure we've got all our custom fields formatted properly. Basically, just remind us to double check everything before we export it into Clio Manage. And this is so much better than what we were doing before. Previously, we were doing all of our intakes in Clio Manage. We would just have them put in as a pending case and put intake as the case type. And so we were having to send all the emails manually. We were having to update tasks automatically to check in and make sure they got it. And I'm very ADHD. My paralegal now is very ADHD. Like, too many tasks will overwhelm us. Like, we crave structure, but also resent people that try to impose it, including ourselves. So we wanted to build around that. We wanted to make it easier on ourselves. So, not having to do all those manual steps, those manual follow-ups, really, really helpful. And taking the time to build out these automation, like I said, it not only frees up time to focus on your client, but it also helps make your firm more resilient. Because you never know when chaos is going to strike. Like, right before we sat down to have this conversation about our intake process, we'd gone through 2 paralegals. And my position didn't even have funding 3 years ago. It didn't exist, and it could go away anytime. And so we've gone through a pandemic too. We would have to take time out of the office, either isolating or recovering if we had COVID. And, we do have to worry about death as well. My boss is 75. We deal with crazy abusers. I've had goons sent to my house. There's a possibility that, we might have to build out and rehire when one of these crazy dudes shows up in my house and murders me with a machete. So, and like Aaron said, we don't like to talk about death, but, she does estate planning. She can tell you that is one of only 2 things in life which are certain. And so just like what we did with the clients, we wanted to accommodate ourselves with the language in the form. So when we were doing the attorney consult and we had this form that we fill out, we did the same thing. We kept it simple. We direct and to the point. We number everything. We explain what the purpose of these questions are, and we make ample use of the tooltips to make sure that, especially when we're getting information that is relevant to our document automation and our templates, that we know how it needs to be formatted. And it seems silly, but just having these little reminders can sometimes be a huge help if you're just having a bad brain day and just can't think right. And another big benefit is, when we lost our funding, we lost 40% of our funding, which was $700,000. And that was right after our paralegal left and we promoted our intake specialist to paralegal. And now we could no longer hire an intake specialist. So our paralegal had to do her new job and her old job at the same time. But thankfully, because we had made the time investment in building out these systems and automations, it really helped. It made us anti-fragile. Or as my boss likes to say, Clio's been our 4th person. Now, the good news is we got some grant funding back, so we're about to have a 4th person. So Clio's about to be out of a job.
Hey.
We still love you.
Yeah.
Well, just me, though. What about the program?
Oh, yeah.
We like
both.
So, yeah.
I kid, of course, and Clio is not going to be a substitute for having that person there, but it did save our ass. And when that new person comes in, when we do hire them, we're not going to have to take a lot of time training them on Clio Grow and training them on the intake process, because if they can read and they can count, they can just go through the steps. And that lets us focus time training them on things that are more important, like how to talk to our clients and build rapport, how to deal with people who are experiencing trauma, how to help on these soft factors instead of spending a bunch of time training them on how to use our program. In other words, instead of training our staff so that they can support our systems, we built our systems to support our staff. And, if taking the time to build these systems in the intake process can save you this much time, I'm very excited to hear what it can do once you build it out through the hired pipeline. That's something, again, Aaron and I are on the same page on. I'd thought about doing that, but held off. And I'm really excited to have Aaron dive in and talk about using the hired pipeline and using Clio Grow throughout the process of the case.
Thank you, Herb. And one of the interesting things, like true story. So when Herb and I were preparing for this, we actually literally prepared some of the exact same slides. So it's kind of interesting. So we kind of had to do some for him and some for me and kind of go down the line. But, I think one of the key things that I want to impress is just that intake doesn't have to stop and Clio Grow doesn't have to stop when the client hires you. So yes, there is a clear line there. Obviously it's going to be different, but you can still use the same tools just in different ways. This statistic really struck me because it's so true. And, last year in the 2021 Legal Trends Report, lawyers spend only 2.5 hours each workday on billable work. This is not a new statistic, but it's a shocking statistic. And so one of the things that we wanted to try to talk about today is just kind of how to gain back some of that time. And I know Herb and I've already spoke a little bit to that as well. And so let's move on to not working. Okay, there's also like an economic argument for what we're talking about today, and I wanted to at least share that because I know that some of you are not the decision makers, and so you're going to go back and you're going to have to talk to higher ups, and you need a statistic to share with them. And so one of the statistics that I've seen is just, the average payroll expenses outside of the legal industry are fairly low. They're kind of in the 15 to 30% range. One of the things that we actually saw in law firms, though, is that because it's a service-based industry, payroll was actually closer to 30 to 50% of revenue, which is, a pretty high percentage, at least that 50% mark. And so what we're talking about today is going to help you decrease those numbers so that you're closer to that 15 to 30%. I would say, for example, for me personally, my payroll is about 25%, and that's a statistic I've worked really hard to get to. And the only way that I've truly been able to do that is using automations and using integrations within Clio to be able to achieve that number. Otherwise, it would be closer to that 50%. Especially with estate planning, we hold a lot of hands. We have a lot of elderly clients, and that's a big part of that. Blueprinting beyond your intake process. Some of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys today about is I wanted to show you how after intake, there's a couple different, things that you can do to create actual workflows. So not just like an email here, an email there, but like true workflows. So one example is when a client misses an appointment, we have a workflow for that. And depending on if they're, what exactly they missed, they might get this workflow a couple of times. Then also the review documents follow up. In estate planning, we have to review the clients have to review their documents. Well, I don't know. I should say have to. Sometimes they don't.
Supposed to.
Right. They're supposed to. This is why we also have a review meeting, because we just know that. But another example that is kind of outside of the estate planning arena is that it also would work really well with discovery for following up on getting those responses to discovery. If you're in the PI world, it would also work great for following up on medical records. Like we mentioned before, just those pain points. That's where, blueprinting really comes in, is, having a system and a process for that.
Or Tupperware. Tupperware is another good example.
Yeah, it is.
I know that didn't land before, but I'm going to keep coming back to it till I get y'all.
Yeah. Aren't they selling Tupperware at Target now or something? It's like,
really?
Yeah, I heard that. It's not just in the home anymore.
I know, but I'm from Canada, so we don't have Target.
Oh, I forgot.
I know, but I'm coming to visit y'all. So
okay.
I'm sorry, Aaron. I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Target's my happy place. My husband.
Target, Tupperware.
Yep.
And Trader Joe's. America has all the great teas.
Right.
Sorry, Aaron. That's not part of the content, folks.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so let's dive back into how to use blueprinting for marketing. So this is my favorite part of the presentation. I really love to use Clio for things outside of my practice because, to be honest with you, I spend a lot of time doing other things like creating lists for the kids, doctor's appointments, cleaning the house, doing the laundry, all that kind of stuff. So I like to systemize that as well. And so one of the ways that I do that is blueprinting. parenting. My husband also has really bad ADHD. So if he can see it, he'll do it. If he can't, it never happens. So for marketing email specific, so I know I already told y'all, email's dying. So I know you're still struggling with that. So just remember, you can text too. It doesn't have to just be an email. But with marketing emails, you can set up a system in Clio Grow or in Lawmatics where you're marketing to different types of customers. So like, for example, maybe somebody comes into your office, does a consultation, doesn't sign up. Well, they haven't said no. They never signed their engagement agreement. You never heard back from them.